Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another Climbing the Rating Ladder video. I'm playing Indichanchi in a, I think this is a 15-10 game. Yeah, 15 plus 10. My opponent opens with D4. Let's play D5. Hope you're all doing well. 1500 rated opponent here, 1535. And I'm going to try to get a semi-Slav if I can. I'm glad my opponent's playing Queen's Gambit, so something principled. We've had a lot of requests for the semi-Slav. Thanks again to everyone who voted in the most recent opening poll. So the semi-Slav is a favorite of mine as well. Like I play Slav and semi-Slav, this being the Slav family of openings, where you're playing c6 against the Queen's Gambit, looking to replace the center pawn should white take on d5. And there is some independent territory here if white wants to, for example, play the exchange Slav, which is a pretty tempting repertoire choice because you cut out all these different versions of the Slav that black can throw at you. There's some offbeat lines too. Sometimes white develops the knight through d2 at some point, knight f3, knight bd2. Sometimes they play an early e3. But I think chances are pretty decent we'll get some form of a semi-Slav. Sometimes you see the fianchetto as well, which I personally don't think is in the spirit of the Queen's Gambit as much against the Slav at least. Okay, and speaking of offbeat lines, white plays a4. So I imagine white is playing this in order to try to regain the pawn after d takes c4, if I decide to take. They're trying to push back against the b5 move. And it's an interesting strategy, but it does weaken the b4 square. That's the square I'm already eyeing up. I could try to take this pawn and see how it goes from there, but I think I'm just going to play knight f6, just develop. I want to see how white proceeds, and almost always knight f6 is a useful move. So let's just go ahead and play it. Yeah, I was also thinking about playing a Budapest Gambit. So d4, knight f6, c4, e5. Some of you have been requesting that. I think I'll try to work that in my next game that I face d4 in a climbing the rating ladder. Okay, knight c3. So again, I could look at d takes c4 here, but my opponent will likely regain the pawn pretty easily. Sometimes you can think about d takes c4, e4, and then e5 as a counterattacking move. I do like that. But d takes c4, e3 may be played. I'm kind of wondering if I could go bishop e6 at that point, although I'm not in love with that position. So I'm thinking maybe just play bishop f5, standard developing move here. Yeah, let's just get the bishop outside of the chain. Now, upon playing bishop f5, before you play bishop f5, you do have to look at c takes d5, c takes d5, queen b3. That's always an option. I didn't pay that much heed here because I know in similar positions, you can even play against queen b3 a gambit of the b7 pawn. It's possible to just continue developing and give white the b7 pawn. And I'm thinking with the inclusion of a4, which is not exactly that useful of a move for white compared to a developing move, I'm probably going to have some options like that. But that being said, queen b3, I do see I have queen d7 if ever I want it. Okay, so my opponent plays e3. Makes sense, just defends the pawn on c4. Let's play e6. So I've achieved this semi-Slav-like structure, but with the bishop outside the chain. The light square bishop is free. You guys know I like to play this structure a lot. You can get this on the black side of the Caro-Kann, for instance, often with this pawn having been traded off. You see it in the Scandinavian as well. Okay, queen b3 played, and I think I'm probably going to play queen b6. One thing I like here is that with queen b6, I'm actually attacking the white queen, which has no defender from the side. Okay, white's pawn is not on a2. Normally, there would be a standoff between the queens. If white didn't want to force the trade, then they wouldn't have to because of the a pawn always being able to recapture. But here, I like this because I definitely don't mind recapturing with my a pawn should white want to trade queens. That opens the a file. I get that half open a file to work with. If white takes on d5, I'm going to be taking with the e pawn at that point. So queen takes b6, a takes b6, c takes d5. I will take with the e pawn. Maybe I can consider even taking with the knight, but likely the pawn. And in my experience, this structure works out great. And I think it should work out even better, given that I have the b4 square. Maybe knight a6, knight b4. Yeah, an option that's open to white with the pawn on a2 is they can meet this queen b6 move with c5 and try to get black to take white. So they can roll reverse it and open the a file themselves. Get that rook on a1 rocking and rolling towards the a7 pawn, and then off in b4, b5. Standard plan. But white doesn't have that luxury here. So they're either going to trade queens or move the queen to, I guess, a2, perhaps back to d1, although that seems like an admission. Oh, there they go. Right as I say that, an admission that they might have wasted some time. But all right, queen d1. So it looks solid enough for my opponent at the moment. I'm very happy with the outcome of the opening so far. Maybe white sensed that this trade was not in their favor, so okay. Looking at bishop b4 here, also this knight a6 move would be ambitious. I'm wondering if knight a6 trying to come to b4, a route for the knight you wouldn't normally ever consider in these positions. I'm wondering if that's just good here, or at least something worth looking at. If I play knight a6, there could be c5 or a5 played. Let's say c5, knight a6, c5, queen a5. Bishop d2, knight into b4, maybe rook c1. Do have knight d3 there. Going through a lot of effort to try to win the bishop pair. So I don't know if I like that so much. I could play pawn a5. I think pawn a5 is pretty reasonable if I want to just stop the momentum of the white pawn. The a pawn, that is. Something about that's pretty appealing, though. Maybe on knight a6, c5, queen c7, I don't have to fear bishop takes a6 because I can kind of claim that white having parted with the light square bishop should give me good compensation for the double isolated pawns. What else here? Just kind of casting around for moves that catch my eye. Knight e4, offering a trade of the knights, maybe trying to get this going. Bishop b4 was my first instinct move, but I don't know that I actually like that white can easily play bishop d2. I somehow think I'd prefer not to make it that simple for white. Because white is lagging in development here, right? They haven't moved any of their kingside pieces yet. So if I can find some smart way to pressure white and capitalize on my lead in development, I would love to do that here. Probably not going to play d takes c4 anytime soon because bishop takes helps white develop. So I'd say knight e4 is one of my leading candidate moves. Knight a6 I'm still toying with. And also bishop b4, maybe a5. It's a lot of moves to consider. I think I'm doing well on all of these moves. So this may be a classic case where I shouldn't sweat it so much. You know, I'm also noticing if I go bishop b4, bishop d2, maybe then I can play knight e4. Knight e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. I could see that potentially going well for me. Trying to induce some favorable trades. All right. Yeah, let's play it. Let's go for it. Again, I'm just not quite sure here. This is a scenario. It's really hard to say what the best approach is. So let's play knight e4 and just make white think about some tension already. Maybe bishop b4 becomes more appealing after this move. White could think about a5. Okay, white takes my knight. And I'm probably going to take with the bishop there. Yeah, let's just take. Don't think there's any reason to consider anything else. If I threw in a check, white could bring their knight back, so that would not be good. Will white go for a big clamp? Like maybe they'll play a5 and I'll tuck my queen back here. I like that white can't play bishop d3 now because they dropped the pawn on g2 and also the rook in the corner thereafter. So we're not making it easy for white to play that forward. The bishop out. c5, I could consider throwing in a queen check if I want. Looking for bishop d2, queen takes b2. But realistically, I got to assume white's going to play queen d2. Looks like a much better move. So check, queen d2. Yeah, and I'm not thrilled about trading queens. I think I'd rather keep queens on board still. So leaning towards queen c7 here. Yeah, I don't know that I really achieved much with the knight e4 move, even the way the game turned out. To be determined, I guess, but feels like I probably could have got more out of that. So, all right, let's play the queen back to c7. And I would expect knight f3 here. I think knight f3 is a decent move. Maybe I can probe with b6. That might be the thing to do coming up. Pawn b6. Try to attack white before white gets fully coordinated. Undermine the queenside. Okay, a5. Very interesting. So white is pushing. I imagine they're trying to prevent me from playing b6 with that move. So yet again, white is neglecting their development. All pieces on the back rank, pushing pawns, but white does have a space advantage. We have to bear in mind. So I can bring my knight into the game, knight d7, maybe look for e5. Maybe also prop up my bishop. I could completely seal off the queen side, but that seems premature. Playing a6, I think I have that option whenever I want. So let's simply develop. I'm going to go knight d7. And again, I would expect knight f3. That's what I would likely do here, but my opponent's been playing some surprising moves, so let's see what they come up with. You don't want to overreact to aggressive pawn pushing, though. That's one strategy you see a lot, and white's continuing it here. So b4. Yeah, they have a big space advantage over here, but they're not attacking anything yet, and we know they're behind in development. So typically your best strategy against that is play elsewhere. Maybe selectively look for a break if you think you can meaningfully push back against them a little bit, but mostly play elsewhere and try to seek counterplay on a different part of the board. So that's why I'm already starting to consider this e5 move. Thinking about just bishop e7 as well and say, go ahead, play b5. I'm okay with that. Because b5 I would actually take, I think. Yeah, so I'm thinking probably bishop e7 will be my move. Let's just do it. Get castled. Gear up for e5 potentially in the middle game. But I am allowing white's pawns to come forward. I don't think white's quite ready for b5 for sure. And if a6, I'm thinking b6. Or possibly just leave it. Leave the tension. If there comes a point soon where I think a6 and b5 are annoying, if white gets coordinated and I think I just want to rule those out, I will play the pawn a6 move. Okay, bishop b2. And I think castles now. I think castles, and you know what, guys? I might be in a position to play b6 after that with the rooks connected. So let's go ahead and castle short. Tuck that king away, and with the rooks speaking to one another, they're on speaking terms now, b6 could be coming. Yeah, because I know I just mentioned playing elsewhere would be my strategy, but I feel white has delayed their development for so long, and they're going to be scrambling to complete that development, that I might be justified in breaking b6 and trying to open this bad boy up when white is caught flat-footed. So that's what I'm leaning towards right now. b6, let's say bishop d3, and then I take on c5. Let's say b takes c5 back, and then I bring a rook to b8, threaten the bishop. I don't think it's anything earth-shattering, but I could see some tactical problems developing for white there. Yeah. And it's going to give white something to think about. So let's go ahead and do b6. I'm envisioning some situations where, let's say white's bishop comes to c3, or even if it stays on b2 and it's not attacked. Bishop f6. And if there's been a trade on this square, sometimes knight takes c5 as a threat, with the undefended bishop being the target. Alternatively there, I think bishop f6 would have been all right, going for e5. I think that was a completely legitimate plan too. I still might play that way, but let's see how white responds. I know I say that a lot, by the way. Someone wrote a comment in the last video to the effect of, when John says, let's see what the opponent does, that means I need some sleep. Let's try to get out of here. But in fact, I would say it means I have ideas, but I'm really unsure how this is going to shape up. And especially in climbing the rating ladder, playing players at different rating levels, it's hard to predict. Sometimes I feel like a poker pro playing against amateur poker players, and even if they don't make plays by the book, in a way, it's just a different experience than playing against fellow pros, because against fellow pros, I roughly know what to expect on most every move. But amateur players, I mean, this player already has played probably 5 to 7 moves in this game that I wasn't expecting, this one included. So Queen C1. Yeah, so taking on C5 is my preference here. Taking A5 is going to be pretty similar, I think. So let's say I take C5, white takes back with the B pawn, then I post a rook on B8, bishop E2. That's where this bishop F6 move may come in, with a threat of knight takes C5. And this is such an obvious move. Let's just play it. Doing all right on the clock, but I'd like to stay a little bit closer to my opponent. Not at all afraid of D takes C5. Maybe that will appeal to white to open the bishop and try to threaten an eventual checkmate on G7, but I think it would be a mistake because the B pawn's pretty loose after that. So white does take with the B pawn, okay. They thought about it for a moment, so that was probably a little tempting. Yeah, let's go rook B8. I'm using this rook because if I were to play rook FB8, then I'd basically have to argue that my rook in the corner on A8 would somehow be useful, which seems exceedingly unlikely with the A pawn completely closed. At least this rook, I have a chance to maybe play rook E8, bishop F6, E5. If I ever want it for central play, I can go for that. So when you're thinking about that problem, this is not a particularly close scenario at all, but it's a typical dilemma. What rook to put on a square when you have both rooks as an option? You really have to look at the other rook that you're intending to leave on its square. What is it actually going to do in the future if it's not going to that file? Okay, bishop E2. So as expected, white is now trying to catch up in development. Okay, so I see a problem with my bishop F6 idea. No, I would be threatening knight takes C5 there. I thought for a second I wouldn't because the queen defends, but bishop F6, let's say castles. Knight takes C5 is playable because queen takes C5, rook takes B2. So concretely, this is looking pretty good, this bishop F6 move. I'm going to play it. And we know white wants to castle. White would love to get their king to safety sometime soon. But I'm poking, prodding, creating a little issue here. How is white going to solve it? Bishop A3 doesn't work because I have queen takes A5 with check. Okay. Bishop C3. Interesting move, but maybe then I come in with the rook. Rook B3. And that, I think, could lead to some potential fireworks because I'm threatening knight takes C5 again at that point. Imagine bishop C3, rook B3, bishop D1 trying to kick me out. I think I can play knight takes C5 there anyways. Okay, white castles. So I think we're going to get knight takes C5 in. Let's just see. Also, we could look at this move order. Rook takes B2, queen takes B2, and then knight takes C5. Problem is it's not forced. White playing D takes C5. So although I would get one pawn, I'd be down in exchange. So this order looks clearly better. Do I want to throw in something like bishop takes F3? I don't think so. I like my light square bishop. So we're probably going to play knight takes C5. Just also checking after queen takes C5, rook takes B2 if I have to watch anything. The queen is up in my grill here. But white's not threatening anything. So I think I can do this. Also, bishop A3. If white tries to pin my knight, I can go knight B3. That would be a threat after knight takes C5. Bombs away. Let's do it. Knight takes pawn. And that took many moves to develop. But I do feel that slight lag white experienced in getting castled, bringing their kingside piece into the game, is the cause of this. And that was due to all the pawn pushing white did. Okay, queen takes C5. We'll take B2. Threaten this. This is still a game. It's not instantly over or anything. but this should be highly advantageous. Up the pawn, 2 bishops. This pawn is backwards, so for the moment, it's not the most useful pawn, but mainly I like my activity here. The fact that I'm bringing the rook into the second rank with tempo. If white wants to defend the bishop, they got to do something kind of passive. Rook e1. I can double rooks there. I can play bishop e7. I have rook b5. Oh, I don't have rook b5. Never mind. Scratch that idea, but probably doubling would be an easy decision coming up. Rook c2. I should mention rook c2. That might be a move I could see myself playing. That would be the way to try to kick the queen out with my rook. Yeah, I like that. So look for this part of the board, the queen side, to be the battlefield still coming up. Okay, bishop a6. Yeah, not a move I would have expected, but that does save the bishop. It's kind of wedged over there. So candidate moves here. Rook c2, bishop e7, doubling the rooks. All look playable. Could consider bishop takes f3, right? That might be the downside of having moved this bishop to a6. Bishop takes f3 shatters white's pawns. But I don't think it's necessary. I think this knight is a poor piece. Maybe g5 is another move, just threatening to go g4. Kind of appealing. But I'd say these moves are still in the lead. Rook c2, bishop e7, rook f to b8. Rook f b8, rook fc1, let's say. I don't know. I'm seeing some potential sacrificial ideas towards the white king. If I was able to do this and bishop h4 when white's rook were not defending there, even if it is defending, maybe that's an idea. But I'd say rook c2, probably still my top candidate, because I think this queen is going to be attacked multiple times. Rook c2, queen a3, bishop e7, let's say. And if the queen goes to b3, I have rook b8. Perhaps the queen is on the verge of being trapped, actually. Queen a4, rook b4. Wow. Yeah, that's some concrete issues with that piece. Whereas if I play bishop e7, the queen can come back to c3 or c1. So it might be nice to rule out those options. Yeah, I think I'm going to go rook c2. Let's do it. What's also interesting, let's say white plays queen b4, I can consider going c5. And again, trying to load up an idea on this diagonal towards that rook on a1. But tentatively, queen b4, I'll probably play rook b8. Attack the queen. If queen e1, in addition to being incredibly passive for white, I have that c5 option. I can also double rooks. Maybe the g5 move becomes appealing. White does not have e1 for their knight anymore, although they do have d2. Okay, queen here. Queen to a3. Am I going to go bishop e7? Probably. This is the line I mentioned. I like it. Yeah, and look how the bishops and the rook on the second rank control so much territory, cutting off the white queen. It's possible that queen could get trapped. I'm not saying exactly a line where she gets trapped, but let's say queen b3, rook b8, queen a4, rook b4. The move queen a3, which would be forced at that point, is highly unpleasant because you walk right into discovery. So I would think at minimum, I have rook takes d4 there. Okay, so white plays queen a4. Yep, much better idea to do that immediately. And let's see. Now I can probably continue with rook b8 if I want, because I've got this defended. But is there something more challenging? Or is that the best I'm going to do? Rook b8, looking for rook b4. Might be. Looks pretty natural too, so I don't know that I should spend too much time looking for better. Knight e5 doesn't look like a concern. I have that rook b4 move. Yeah, let's play rook b8. Feel like I have pretty good coordination here. I've been happy about that. So idea is tentatively rook b4. Yeah, this queen a4 move, I don't think I was considering that for some reason, but I don't know why, because that's just clearly better than queen b3. White didn't have hardly any options there. Only two legit moves with the queen b3 or queen a4. But of course, queen a4 in hindsight looks way more obvious. In my head, I might have been guilty there of playing the move that for white that I wanted white to play. But this way, white's not losing a tempo. If they had triangulated their queen to a4, then of course, this is looking overwhelming. And still looking very good, but maybe white can muster up some counterplay if they can get at c6. Okay, white plays rook b1. So that disputes the b file. It also leads to some potential discoveries, so we have to look at ideas of moving my rook away. I'm not seeing exactly how I do that effectively here, though. Maybe rook c3 is my one thought in terms of that. That's a nice little square for the rook. Even though it's undefended there, I open the bishop towards b1. So imagine rook c3, rook takes b8, queen takes b8. The rook is guarding c6. I'm guarding b1. Maybe bishop c2 becomes an idea there. Feels very difficult for white to make a good move at that point. I could also simply play rook b2, one of the rooks coming into b2, or make a luft move, just making some space around my king. Again, g5 kind of comes to mind. Leaning towards rook c3. Okay, I'm at 4 minutes here, so leaning towards rook c3. Rook c3, rook takes b8, queen takes b8, knight e5. How do I feel about that? It's slightly annoying. Slightly annoying. So I could play a move like f6 if I wanted to rule out. Or how about bishop d6? Bishop d6, I think, should be a strong candidate here, too. Maybe that's the move. Yeah, I'm liking that. Because then I can threaten bishop takes f3 and bishop takes h2. And it controls e5. Let's do it. That was an interesting thought process there, because I wasn't really considering this move initially. And I almost played rook c3. But when I started seeing knight e5 being an annoying option in various lines, I looked for ways to prevent it. First, I looked at f6, solve the issue around my king. But then this one seems more obvious the further I got into my calculations. Let's pre-move this capture. So still in control here, but let's continue to manage the clock. There is that 10-second increment. By the way, this is a good baseline time control to play, 15 plus 10. I think you could argue it's even a little fast for many of you out there, but it's a popular one online, far better than Blitz or Bullet in particular for your improvement. So the interesting thing about that bishop takes f3 idea I mentioned is not exactly a threat yet, because on bishop takes f3, white could take my rook on c2. But it's annoying for white to have to think about. I have a feeling they may want to play h3, either now or after the trade, so they don't have to consider bishop takes f3, bishop takes h2. I don't see much white can do in the way of activity here. Just brainstorming active ways for white to break out. I'm not really seeing it. Maybe knight g5, but at minimum, I can move my light square bishop. I can also take h2 a check against knight g5. Yeah, white does play h3. Okay, so they leave the rooks on board. And maybe now I can go to that rook c3 idea when knight e5 is covered. I could also just wait. I could play h6. That could be a good strategy here, h6, because white has shown that they're thinking a little bit and maybe they're not sure how to proceed. So why not just get rid of the back rank issue myself? But rook c3, on the other hand, has some nice ideas associated with it, so I'm still liking the look of that. Mainly because I'm threatening rook a3 in some cases. Or bishop c2 even. Yeah, let's go rook c3. It's close. This is a close call, though. I only have a couple minutes, so let's play it. Looking to force this rook to a decision. White could play rook b to c1 if they want, but then I think rook b4 is looking good. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Rook b4, queen a1. Okay. In all these lines, I'm up a pawn, but if white wants to keep the rooks on board for the time being, they may have that option, rook b to c1. By the way, I've mentioned this before. I don't like what chess.com does with their pre-moves, where it actually covers the piece if there's a capture, because it just looks weird sitting here when it looks like I'm down a rook. I understand why they do it, but I prefer the Lee chess way, where it just shows an arrow. It doesn't cover the piece in question. So white does trade on b8. And now this rook is really hurting. It's hard to find a home for it. Knight d2. Bishop check, king h1. I'm not seeing much of a follow-up there. So probably I'm going to move this bishop. Bishop c2 is obvious. By the way, if I go rook a3, I run into queen takes c6. So I think bishop c2 more than likely. Yeah, let's play it. This is protected. And I'm looking to maximize my bishop pair here. No trade of bishop for knight. No allowing white to play knight takes e4. I might not even want to trade light square bishop for light square bishop anytime soon. I mean, I almost had an option like that, bishop d3. But this is highly uncomfortable for white playing against these active pieces. So let's say white goes queen a1 here, attacking my rook. I'm thinking rook a3 at that point, queen c1, rook a2. Reposition the rook, guard the bishop. White looks increasingly cramped there. I can imagine in a lot of endgames, white just loses the a-pawn. Okay, white plays queen a2, so there, rook a3 would drop the bishop. So maybe a savvier move by white. But if I move my bishop back now, let's say I play bishop f5 or bishop g6. It's kind of nice that rook c2 is the threat. Let's play the bishop all the way back to g6. Threatening rook c2. Or at least menacing rook c2. I don't know, maybe white can meet rook c2 with rook b1, which looks a little odd. No, that wouldn't work because my queen is defended on b8. I could play rook takes a2, and I'd be up a rook. But okay, so rook c2 is a threat. We did a little bishop dance to try to make it that way. If white moves the knight back to f3, maybe then I play this h6 move, just to once and for all get rid of the back rank threat. White plays e4. Another unexpected move. I think white's trying to get the rook to b1. They're trying to block. Interesting. Now, I could take with the bishop, right? That would win a pawn if I take with my bishop here. This is an interesting move. I mean, I don't hate this decision by white because it looks a little odd and it's probably bad, but I see their point. Like they're trying to wrest control of the b file away from me. So I respect it. Maybe queen b4 here. Queen b4 is interesting. Idea rook b1, queen takes d4. Because I've got the b8 square covered. Yeah, I'm liking that. There's also rook a3, but I feel like I should hold off on that. Bishop f4 or queen b4. Those are my main candidates here. Let's go queen b4. What am I doing against knight b1, though? Queen b4, knight b1. I have rook b3. Okay, let's do it. Under a minute. So cue the heart palpitations for you guys. Happens to me sometimes, too. And I'm trying to be mindful. I think this is a pretty good response. Hits the pawn. Yeah, white does go there. But I think this is more bark than bite. Unless I'm missing something. But I think I can take d4 here. Let's do it. This is covered. I mean, yeah, it feels safer if I played my h-pawn forward, h6, h5, whatever, give my king the window. But thinking concretely, how is white going to punish me here? I'm not seeing it. And concrete calculation always has to triumph at the end of the day. Your feeling about the position should always be potentially overruled. You should allow for your feelings to be overruled by your calculation. And white has to think about their own king, because remember, my bishop, in addition to guarding b8, also controls h2. So there's some potential back rank implications if I can ever threaten rook c1. White has a couple ways they can block on f1, but point still stands. Maybe white will play something like queen b2 here, trying for queen b8. Funny thing is, queen b8, I would play bishop f8. I wouldn't take the queen. Yeah, white does play queen b2. So this might be a good moment just to push my h-pawn forward. I think I'll probably do that. Maybe there's something more aggressive, but let's not take any chances. I still need my queen defending my rook, which I think it can in all lines that I'm looking at here. h6, knight b3, queen b4, for instance. So let's push the pawn. I'm going to push it to h6. Could also go to h5, but it's kind of nice that I have this covered, just in case. Keep it calm. Asking ourselves always, what was the purpose of my opponent's last move? I think it's to try to go queen b8, and this move addresses that. Even if I was unsure if queen b8 was actually a threat due to bishop f8, it's just a nice move to have in almost every situation. All right, knight f3. Was thinking about taking on e4 against that, hitting the rook. So we don't mind if white takes our rook. There's rook e1 for white, but then I can go queen b4. Yeah, let's capture. Power of the queen and the bishop battery here. Attacking b1. Rook e1, queen b4. No problem, keeping everything coordinated. At this point in the game, I'm up 3 pawns. I have an extra E, D, and C pawn. Rook e1 played. Could I get fancy here? Rook takes f3 or something? Not really seeing that working. Not a great time to get fancy anyways. We're up material, but still trying to calm the position down and time pressure. So stay coordinated in these moments. If you can, build some redundancy in. Have pieces protecting other pieces. Take care of your king. That's how you get the job done in these winning positions that still require some care. Not the time to play loose moves. Long range moves away from your king, way across the board, trying to go after some errant pawn or something. Nah, keep things tight. Okay, we get the trade. White can't go rook b1, tempting move, but it's going to blunder. Bishop takes b1. Play the knight up to e5, okay. Reasonable. I'm thinking move the rook or simply move my bishop, my light square bishop, but The rook discoveries are tempting here. Definitely tempting. I think I'm going to move the bishop, though. I think I'm just going to play bishop e4. I've got this held. So no worries there. Maybe white will go f3. But there's still various discoveries on the rook. Also bishop c5 if I need it. White's almost losing on time. Yeah, knight d7 I don't think does much. So probably simply take here. There's some vague ideas if white could give a check on the back rank, king h7, knight f8, some perpetual ideas maybe, but not working. Okay, let's go here. Target f2, bishop's nicely anchored. Remember, we like that redundancy we built in. Bishop comes back. How about rook c2 now? That looks pretty good. Threaten on f2. Look for trades. Pre-move the capture. White has one check, but then what? And I'm up a sea of pawns here. That also surprisingly don't have any defects in them. They're all connected. Just play bishop g6. And now we're going to focus on advancing these pawns. When advancing them, I can try to advance them on the color of white's bishop, so I can play like c5, c4 if I want. I think that's probably going to be my default here. I could also throw in rook c1 looking for bishop d3, but I got to assume the white king is going to come up. So I think better to play, yeah, like c5 here. Look for c4. Keep things connected. If white goes after the b pawn, maybe rook b2. Okay, white plays that. Interesting move. h5, take. There's bishop d3. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to play h5, but on take, I'm actually just going to play bishop f5. Because I don't want white crowding me out. They are threatening to play h5. We're gonna make a point to go here. So no bishop d3. Just always thinking, put yourself in your opponent's shoes in these desperate situations for them. You know they're looking for any semblance of counterplay. That's where you got to be extra cautious, extra attentive. Yeah, it's a good attempt. Rook takes f7 is an idea. So I don't know if it's worth trying to even save that. I don't see how I can save that pawn. I'm probably just going to let them take it. Yeah, let's just go c4. So it's kind of funny. I'm actually giving 2 pawns here, but this structure is so bad for white that I don't think it should matter. I can probably play bishop d3 here, but then maybe bishop h3. Yeah, I think I'm going to go c3 at this point. c3, d4. Still looking for ways that the bishop could come here with some effect, but take, bishop d3 is no longer a check because there's a pawn sitting here. King looks perfectly safe. No issues. Rook b2 now, probably. Yep. h6 never a threat because a king takes. Comes behind the pawn, but I think now c2, rook b1, and c1 queen is going to decide matters. So some tough defense by my opponent here at the end. I mean, they were trying. They found some interesting ideas. The whole e4 thing was a valiant attempt, but the damage was largely done at that point. Promote the pawn. Yeah, I'll be curious if the computer says white's opening strategy was acceptable. Thanks to my opponent for the game. Interesting battle. Yeah, good opponent here. I think their opening strategy was a little sketchy, although I could see this actually having a fair degree of success. Maybe around here, white could actually stabilize things if they play accurately. Like it's possible, even though I talked at great lengths about white neglecting their development, it's possible this is still fine for white. And of moves that I'm a little unhappy about in hindsight, I think knight e4. That one's probably not the best. I probably got a little too fancy there. Maybe should have just played like this, or possibly the knight a6 move I was mentioning. A5 even. I mentioned a5 and then discounted it. Aside from that, this was critical. White castling. This is what allowed me to play knight takes c5. I think the trend of the game, unless I missed something major, the trend of the game was just in my favor. After this, it's hard for white to come back after this move, even though there were some complications. So instead of castling, looks critical for white to do something like, let's say, rook a2 here. Rook a2 and defend the bishop, also take their rook off of that diagonal. That could have been interesting. I'll check that with the engine. Tentatively, I think trying to double up the rooks looks pretty good. Maybe I go to the e5 plan. Maybe I even take on f3 and then play e5. Those are all things I would think about. But yeah, I'm going to be focusing on the opening and then just seeing if there's any improvement to be had in my technique. I'm sure there was. But for white, like advice to my opponent, because this is climbing the rating ladder, so I try to give advice at different rating levels. I would say this is a player with a pretty good understanding, and it seems to me they calculate well. I set them lots of little traps, and they didn't fall for it, and they were trying to create problems for me calculation-wise. I would say they probably need to work on their openings, because you don't want to have to be thinking here on move 3, this move a4, clear indication, and white thought for 45 seconds on that move, clear indication that they're not sure of the theory. And this is a major line of the Queen's Gambit. So at this level, you probably got to know a little more theory. And perhaps having a bit more sense of urgency about developing. Like I do think a couple of these decisions were a bridge too far for white. But otherwise, pretty solid player here. Let's check out the game review. Everyone's favorite time of the video, right? Analysis gang. All right, so I got an 89.7 accuracy to 82.9 for my opponent. You can see the graph. I kind of forget to look at this sometimes, but the trend of this graph is sort of how I felt in the game. Like this is probably where, I don't know what move this is, but I'm guessing it's going to be where knight takes c5 was played. Yeah, allowing that little shot, that does get the double question mark from the engine, but allowing that shot allows black to take over the advantage for the rest of the game, but it's not too bad up until that point, even though white was playing some sketchy looking moves. So let's take a closer look here, get a little more granular. So against c6, usually white plays one of the knight moves here, knight f3 or knight c3, with knight f3 being the most popular. Knight c3 also perfectly good, might even feel more natural. Although with knight c3, you do have to watch d takes c4 because it can be a little harder to get the pawn back. And that's because if you play e3, b5, a4, undermining, black has b4 with tempo. White can play knight a2, it's just a little bit different of a line. Whereas with knight f3, if black decides to take on c4, and let's say you play e3, b5, a4, there's no b4 with tempo on the knight. White should recover the pawn pretty easily here with an advantage. You can also play c takes d5. That's the exchange Slav. I played that quite a bit on my channel. I won't go into that, but that's an option too. And there are other assorted systems. I mentioned a couple like knight f3, knight bd2. Sometimes you see white fianchettoing their kingside bishop. I personally don't think that's the greatest plan here, but it's possible. But yeah, a4. Let's click off the feedback, add in the lines. Thought about trying to refute that move, but I mean, I kind of see white's point. If takes, they just want to have a little more of a grip on the square. And that passes the sniff test according to the engine. So, all right, knight f6, knight c3. I play my bishop outside the chain. Principled move. You always got to be cautious about the queen b3 response, though. So let's say white had played queen b3 directly. Yeah, again, this queen b6 move. And that's interesting because this is a version of what could have happened in the game. And if c takes d5, I can take with the knight. I remember an old Capablanca game, Janowski versus Capablanca, featuring a similar situation where Kappa played his bishop back to d7 soon. So something along these lines, like here, and then knight out. And despite the pawns like this, he got a big advantage. He was able to use those pawns as a strength, actually, in the middle game. So it kind of reminds me of that. So I think because white has spent time on this a4 move, intuitively I was not particularly worried about queen b3. But when you're looking at moving the light square bishop out early on the queen side in various openings, watch queen b3. It's especially relevant in the queen's gambit because the c pawn will have moved, so queen b3 is enabled. Like, watch that move because d5 and b7 can be loose. And this is another version of it. Takes, let's say I take with a pawn here. Could maybe even take with a knight, but let's say pawn takes, queen here. Yeah, in this case, knight c6. And this is one of these situations I was mentioning where it's feasible for me to actually gambit this pawn. I'm guarding d5, and if queen takes b7, I can take here. And this position's terrible for white, according to the engine. Okay, so all that being said, bishop f5 appears justified. e3, I simply played e6. Engine also pointing out knight a6 is interesting here, yeah. This knight a6 move, it highlights how a4 is a weakening move for white, even in mainline Slavs. Because black can look to use this b4 square. White doesn't have a pawn that can cover that square anymore. So e6 actually gets the dubious mark because I think the engine likes that knight a6 move much, much more. Yeah, that's already flirting with a +1 advantage for black. Interesting. Even with something like bishop d3? Seems so. Here, this. And I guess white has to watch both these points now. If queen e2, covering c2, I take, and white can't take back. Yeah. Don't think I considered knight a6 at that point, but I should have. It makes a lot of sense before white has a chance to take or push this pawn, because on takes, we're not taking back. We're going to throw in knight b4 and threaten the fork. A little in-between move. So, okay, something good to keep in mind. So e6, queen b3, engine doesn't like it. Probably have several different ways I can play against this. Can no longer play knight c6 anymore, but yeah, I was pretty happy with queen b6. And if white goes here, this structure tends to be nice for black, as I was alluding to. Takes, and then e-pawn takes. In this case, I would take with the e-pawn rather than the c-pawn, because I like this even better than that other Capablanca style option I mentioned. So I can still send my knight to b4. White's never getting a5 in. Any piece I put on b4 is hard for white to kick out. Maybe I can play b5 and use the pin here. White has no forward progress on the queen side. Tough position for white. So my opponent went back to d1. I was a little surprised by that, but actually under the circumstances, I don't mind that. I mean, maybe queen a2 as well is an option, but queen d1. Yeah, and I was wondering about this moment. So not so happy with knight e4. Hard to say if it's a mistake, but I do feel like I'm leaving some advantage on the table there. Probably this is a lot simpler. I just wasn't sure about bishop d2. Castles, knight f3. Okay, the engine's saying more or less simply develop here. Knight bd7. And just be happy with the fact that I'm coordinated. I have my bishop outside the chain. All right, I'll buy that. What about knight a6? Yeah, c5. This is what I was not sure about. Queen a5, bishop d2. Yep. Looked at this line. Okay, good that I didn't go for this because the knight a2. Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? I can't support my knight. Bishop's screened out. Knight d3 is check, but after takes, I can't take back because my queen's under attack. Trouble. Okay, so it doesn't actually look like there's a refutation of what white's doing here. And by the way, if black's play looks familiar and you've never played a semi-Slav or even seen me play it, or Slav for that matter, you might be thinking of a London. The setup I have here, this is like a reverse London. So tons of similarities between the two. So with knight e4, I was mostly trying to weaken this diagonal for white, create some tension, and maybe get bishop b4 in under favorable circumstances. But it seemed okay how this turned out for white. Take. c5. Okay, I can think about queen b4. I did consider that briefly, looking for bishop d2, queen takes b2, but I thought queen d2. Yeah, I don't really like the look of this. Engine doesn't seem to think it's that much better for me, though. So queen c7 seems fine. And remember, if white plays bishop d3 anywhere here, we get bishop takes g2 in. So I did feel white should go knight f3 around here, but maybe a5. That's actually the top move of the engine. Maybe that's actually an accurate move, because if white doesn't play that, I probably will have the option of b6 at the very least on the next move. Let's say knight f3. Yeah, I can start undermining. And if white tries to defend that, I can play this a5 move, wage complete warfare on their structure. It's a typical move once again. And now black starts to get a generous advantage. So maybe a5 was high level, just a good move. I think it is. Okay, so I'm just developing here b4. Yeah, I mean, this is not very much for black at all. I mean, we're talking about a quarter pawn here, maybe, of an advantage. But maybe now bishop b2. I did mention specifically white delaying the kingside development hit my radar as being suspect. So I think instead of moving this dark square bishop, I would have moved the knight out. Knight f3, maybe knight e2. Yeah, maybe f3. f3 looks a little weakening, but I think I would have done this. Bishop here or here and just try to castle. Because it did come down to like a single move, a single tempo that allowed me to win this pawn coming up. So castles, knight f3. Yep, b6. Again, I could think about the central plan. If I want to ignore what's happening on the queen side, or even lock the queen side and go for this. But it felt like the time was right with my rooks speaking to one another, to attack on the queen side. Queen c1 is dubious. Better to play bishop d3. Interesting. And then if I take, queen takes. Okay, the computer wants white to do this. Looks vaguely like the game. I mean, I would think I'm a little bit better here still, but maybe white can stabilize it. Castles, at least they're not running into knight takes c5 yet. I can try to set it up with a move like this. But white has counter arguments. Yeah, so White has to increasingly play accurately here, because one move could lead to a tactical problem for them, as occurred in the game. Sorry, it keeps showing that mini board. I don't know why it's doing that. It's very annoying. All right, so queen c1, I take. White takes with the b pawn. Wow, computer gives that a question mark. Really? But it doesn't say that d takes c5 is better. At least now. That could be a depth thing with the engine when it runs the auto analysis. I don't know. I mean, this move doesn't look too great either. Just rook b8, attack this. There are ideas with queen c3, but long term, I don't think you want this backward pawn sitting here. So, all right, b takes c5. Rook b8. Also, it's suggesting take, e5. So damage the white kingside and punch in the center. Totally different direction. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe with the idea of taking, as if pawn takes, then these pawns become noticeably weak. All right, but rook b8's consistent. Bishop e2. I go bishop f6. Right, and here's where I mentioned probably white should play something like rook a2. Maybe bishop c3 as well. So rook a2, how would this go? e5. I think I was mentioning maybe rook coming in as well. Visually, this looks nice for black. I own the file. But concretely, perhaps there's nothing. And maybe my rook's even in trouble here. Right? Like if I retreat it, I think I actually run out of real estate with this rook. I can do this, and all these squares are covered by white's minor pieces. So that's why it wants me to play this move now. Interesting. Sack the exchange. Yeah, I wouldn't want to have to do this, though. Okay, so yeah, I think rook a2 is the move. Rook a2, and maybe I punch through in the center. I probably would have gone for the rook doubling, though, truthfully. Maybe doubling on b4 is a better square. I don't know, but I probably would have looked to do something up the file. So castles, and yeah, nice shot here. Knight takes c5. Without this move, I think white's doing all right. But with this move, things completely change. Because again, D takes C5, runs into bishop takes B2, and that's winning. Meanwhile, I'm threatening this. So the computer says white should actually play rook A3 to avoid getting forked there. White played queen takes C5. I took here, hit the bishop. This move surprised me a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go through this phase of the game kind of fast. I'm relatively happy with this, especially that the engine is giving me a clean bill of health here. Even bishop D6. I spent a fair amount of time on this move, over a minute and a half on this one move, almost 2 minutes. I don't have much to add to my thought process in game, but just trying to play useful moves. I don't want to cede control of the B file. I'm looking to attack white's queen, but as I mentioned, like thinking white's going to play queen B3 here is kind of ridiculous on my part because that's just a free tempo. So I should have seen that they were going to go queen A4. And this is just one of these positions against a strong player. Like white's really going to struggle. That doesn't mean you give up. That doesn't mean you stop trying. But I think occasionally beginning players have this perception like you can work out of positions like this. But once a strong player gets their teeth sunk into you, the damage like 90-95% of the time has been done. So just real tough situation for white. Being down a pawn, facing the bishop pair. Okay, it doesn't like this move, rook c3. Says I should take first and then play rook c3. I wonder why. Not quite sure. That's a little hard to appreciate. I mean, white could go here against rook c3. I didn't think that was that big of a deal. Yeah, this, or I think I mentioned rook b4 was an option as well. Kind of high level, but maybe it wants to pressure c6 at some point. So, all right, rook takes b8, queen takes b8, knight d2. This is already plus 2.5, plus 3. We did a little dance here. Trying to go rook c2, having lured the queen to a2. Yeah, and e4 was interesting. This is a difference between engine chess and human chess. Like, I, as a human, I kind of like white's e4 move because it's a bad situation. White's probably going to lose regardless if I keep my head screwed on straight. Yeah, knight f3 is probably a better move, but it's passive. e4 at least kind of confuses the issue with us having 2 minutes left here. So white is trying to go rook b1 and get out my back rank, trying to create some counterplay. So personally, I think it's good to take selective shots like that in a bad position because when you lose the game, you get 0 points, right? It doesn't matter how you lose. So you might as well go down fighting and doing anything possible versus just passively losing over time. Yeah. Queen b4, I think, was a nice response. Just realizing that my bishop was good to cover everything. Yep. h6, take care of the back rank. Always good to keep that in mind. Okay, good. This all looked fine. Maybe when I get to this ending, I didn't have to like sweat the whole g4, h4, h5 operation as much, but I think this was fine. I'm not gonna criticize my play all that much. Oh, I didn't see that I can actually play c4, h5, and then bishop d3. That's pretty clean. That's even cleaner than what I did. It didn't connect with me mentally that I could actually use that square once my pawn was on c4. So, okay, I played this h5 move, take. And again, we're not going to take here. Might still be winning, but we allow bishop d3, and I'd have to go down and exchange. I have a lot of pawns to show for it, but that's not a route we want to go down. So just being vigilant here. Yeah, and these pawns are too strong. I can give my f-pawn, and no problem. King safe. Had white played rook c7, by the way, I probably would have played rook c1. d4 also looks good, but rook c1 threatening bishop d3. And after king f2, then play c2, and then I'm ready to move this rook and promote. It's winning. Yep, promote the pawn and win the game. All right, so yeah, interesting one. Thanks to my opponent for the game. Offbeat opening, but some instructive points there, especially in how to handle this queenside pawn rush. Again, like, don't overreact against that. You can see, even though it seemed like I passed up some opportunities earlier in the game, I was trying to look for a selective moment after I was coordinated. This b6 move, only after I had castled and connected the rooks, to try to break white's position, right? And that translated to this just slight jump in play and in development that enabled this knight takes c5 tactic. Great one to keep in mind in these positions. But that was not easy. I mean, we were getting into a rating range here. This is climbing the rating ladder, but I bounce around and play different ratings. But those of you who are at this rating level can attest, like, people are tenacious. They calculate well. Again, kudos to my opponent for their calculation. And you got to have your head on a swivel at all times and protect yourself at all times. The number one rule in boxing as well. Chess is very much like that. All right. Thanks for everyone watching this. This will be especially useful for you Slav, semi-Slav players, maybe even London players, because we got a reverse London setup. Let me know what you think. And thanks for watching, as always. I'll see you guys again in another video very soon.